Guys, today we're gonna take a look at the units that to me are the 5 best sub DPS in Genshin Impact. First of all, what's a sub DPS to me exactly? By sub DPS I mean the capability to deal off-field damage mostly while spending as low time as possible on field. In this video I'm going to rank units purely based on their capability to deal damage themselves, and I'm saying this because characters like Yelan, Furina also have supportive effects in their kit, but those won't be in the equation here because the purpose of this video is simply to evaluate how much they can carry the team through their own damage. I'm gonna mostly focus on the unit's value of Constellation 0 as a baseline here, but I won't completely disregard the early Constellation signature weapons because they do give a bigger picture. Let's go. 5th, Yelan. Yelan is a Hydro sub DPS that can deal practically all of her damage in two ways. The main one is her Elemental Burst, which makes her shoot coordinated attacks when the active character uses normal attacks, and the second one is her Elemental Skill, which is a single instance Hydro attack that will hit all the opponent's Yelan has faced through after its activation. In this sense, Yelan's damage profile can remind you of Xingqiu, because the latter has a very similar Elemental Burst and also a single hit Elemental Skill. But the big difference between the two is that while Xingqiu has a 21 seconds cooldown on his skill, Yelan's cooldowns stop at 18 seconds. Specifically, her skill cooldown is of 10 seconds, something that can make her much more flexible if the team rotation allows it. In this sense, it's worth mentioning that when she's used as the only Hydro character in the team, in rotations that only allow her to use her skill once, Yelan's damage is not too different from Xingqiu. On the flip side, when she can use it twice, her energy requirements decrease significantly, and that's the true difference maker when it comes to her output. More generally, if used in setups like Double Hydro, her damage really starts to shine, as in those situations you can use a high value weapon like Aqua Simulacra on her, which is virtually unusable if her energy requirements are high instead. Aside from Double Hydro, Yelan is also a competent sub DPS on Vape teams, where you are able to double sword through the Anemo unit and amp her damage throughout the rotation. If you're also able to trigger Vaporites through her Elemental skill on these teams, you'll open up the possibility for some serious insta-kill scenarios here. This becomes even more relevant if you're able to get Yelan's Constellation 1, which gives her a second Elemental skill stack, increasing her damage by a lot while also alleviating her energy issues. Overall, a very strong sub DPS, only limited by your energy requirements downside that apply to quite a few teams sadly. 4th, Furina. Just like Yelan, she's an off-field Hydro damage dealer, but compared to her, she has some big advantages. First, her off-field damage capabilities are tied to an Elemental skill and not the burst, which means they're not tied to an energy requirement. Realistically, however, you'll still need to satisfy your energy-related stuff because of how relevant the burst is for her support, but it's still a positive thing at the end of the day. Second, her skill summons pets that attack opponents independently, meaning their damage is not tied to what the active character does, something that makes Furina's output very consistent. Third, the skill lasts for 30 seconds as opposed to Yelan's 15 seconds long Elemental Burst, so it can realistically fit into more types of rotations. Fourth, Furina's lower Hydro application compared to Yelan, which makes her able to be played in front Vaporite setups where you use a Pyro Applier to let Furina Vaporite, a scenario where her own output can reach the level of below average main carry even if she's not receiving tons of buffs or support. On the flip side, however, she also has a serious weakness. Her skill will continuously drain HP from the whole team, and if the character's HP reach 50%, Furina will start dealing less damage, as that's a specific condition in her kit. In all of those teams that don't use a dedicated team-wide healer, like Cookie Furina Hyperbloom or Bennett teams, Furina suffers from this issue to some extent. This means that if you want Furina to have a great damage floor, you need to bring a team-wide healer, which is a limitation Yelan doesn't impose on you. Besides this though, she's very good at dealing damage, since she can at least match Yelan's output in solo or double Hydro setups while having higher ceiling thanks to her Vaporites compositions. Moreover, she also gains an enormous damage increase from her Constellation 2 if you're able to get it, which is really nice if you care about that type of investment. Third, Fischl. Fischl is an Electro off-field damage dealer, and their main strength is having an Elemental skill and an Elemental burst that basically do the same thing, in that they summon her companion, Odds, for up to 12 seconds on Constellation 4. This means two really good things. First, she can alternate her skill and burst in subsequent rotations, like for example, she can use the skill the first rotation, then the burst the second rotation, then the skill again the third rotation, and so on in a loop. This makes her able to run on zero energy requirements basically always, as she's not using the burst every time. Second, she can chain her Elemental skill with her Elemental burst continuously every 12 or 13 seconds to keep odds on field with practically full uptime and maximize her damage output that way. Fischl's main teams are Quicken and Chevreuse teams, both cases where she gets plenty of support and buffs. Out of the two, Quicken is the most common setup, specifically Quicken teams that have an Electron fielder. This is important because her Ascension 4 talent makes her shoot an extra attack every time an on-field Electron reaction is triggered. Aggravate, so the Electro side of the Quicken reaction counts as an Electro reaction, while Spread, so the Dendro side of the Quicken reaction doesn't. This means that Fischl will do much more damage with Colorend as the on-fielder rather than Alhaitham as the on-fielder, for example. Another great thing about Fischl is that she can snapshot buffs, meaning that the stats she has at the time she summons odds will be considered for the entirety of his attack windows, regardless of what Fischl does after. This makes her a fantastic fit with characters like Bennett, so for example Sharu's teams, but also others. Still, it's worth mentioning that Fischl only really stands out in those best cases scenarios I mentioned, and kind of falls off to a decent level when you can provide her that level of support. She also has other issues though, like as a 4-star, her investment potential is lower compared to Yelan and Furina, where 5-stars with better constellations and also have a signature weapon, although options like Aqua or Polar Star are still pretty decent for Fischl. Second, probably the bigger issue is that you can very easily get less from odds than what you'd expect. For one, if you don't chain your skill and burst exactly every 12-13 seconds, you will cumulatively get lower uptime on it than you potentially could. This is a very common issue for Fischl in all of those teams that aren't specifically structured around her dealing damage. The second issue is that odds doesn't have that big of a range, and unlike Furina's pets and Yelan's burst, it won't follow your active character, but rather needs Fischl to switch in and reposition him through the elemental skill again. So, Fischl has insane theoretical single target damage potential even at free-to-play investment, but overall some kit-related clunkiness and some team restrictions keep her out of the top 2 of this ranking. Second, Shenling. Since I just finished talking about clunkiness in a character, let me just start this segment by saying that Shenling has more issues than about anybody else in this list. Her energy requirements are the most problematic out of any unit here, as she borders on unplayable if she's used as the only pyro character on the team, and she can have plenty of issues even if that's not the case. She's pretty much glued to Bennett, because he can battery her, he provides her some pretty insane attack buffs that she can snapshot, pyro resonance, and even damage bonus at Constellation 6. Furthermore, her elemental skill, Goba, is very inconsistent as he attacks on a very small range and can't move around, so it will very often feel like an inconsequential part of her kit. That said, she's still arguably the best sub DPS in the game, and that's solely thanks to her elemental burst. With Shenling, it's not just that she deals damage, because in that sense specifically she doesn't really stand out compared to other units here, but it's the fact that all of that damage can hit on a wide range, something Yelan, Furina and Fischl can do for the majority of their output. Where she shines are Vaporize teams with good enough Hydro appliers to enable her Vaporizes. Child is her best ally in this sense, because he applies Hydro in AoE very easily, so Shenling can typically trigger Vaporizes on all the opponents surrounding him, but lesser Hydro appliers like Ayato, Kokomi, Sincho can also be valid options for her. She can also be used on Monopyro or Chevreuse team, since her damage is pretty good even without reactions, and she still retains all of her AoE potential regardless. In these situations, she also becomes easier to manage, because she's surrounded by Pyro characters here, and so her energy requirements get lower. Overall, she's amazing, and only really held back by her many restrictions. Just gonna very quickly address some units that couldn't make it into this list. First, Chiori, off-field Geo sub DPS. She's very competitive on teams that can use constructs like a double Geo with Zhongli or full send mono Geo, but the thing is, even with that, she's just Yelan level overall in terms of damage, I would say, and their non-construct scenario basically halves her damage. I would have still put her in if double Geo was a very competitive thing in the meta right now, but I don't see it that way. Second, Bloom as a whole. Honestly, if I had to rank any of the Bloom triggering units like Cookie, Raiden, Toma, they would probably be in this list. However, that's not solely coming from them, it's more so something Dendro enables, and I find it hard to attribute that to a single unit. Third, to me she only really shines when she's used partially on field to take advantage of her Electro normal attacks and alleviate her massive energy requirements that way. As an off-fielder, she's just a worse, less flexible Fischl to me. Finally, the first place, Emily. Okay, let me address the elephant in the room real quick. Just like Chiori, Emily is a big restriction when it comes to her team structures. For Chiori, that's having a construct maker on the team, while for Emily it's having burning applied on enemies. Without that, her damage is not good. However, differently from Chiori and their construct teams, Emily's burning teams are much more relevant and flexible in terms of compositions, and most importantly, they don't lock Emily into being played with another specific unit like it can feel for Chiori and Zhongli at times. The thing I love about Emily is that she can reach the same levels of damage as other units in this list, but with far fewer restrictions and conditions. Her damage output without receiving particular buffs is about as high as it can get in the meta for sub DPS right now, and on top of that she has a long-lasting elemental skill whose coordinated attacks aren't tied to specific actions. Plus, it has a very big range, and in the eventuality opponents step out of it, Emily can resummon it through her elemental burst. Basically, she has all the quality of life in the world. Speaking about the burst, it hits like a nuke when properly buffed. It's an on-field ability that launches a multitude of dendro attacks and hits all the opponents in range singularly. If buffed by something like Bennett's burst, the ability's output can easily exceed hundreds of thousands of damage even at cheap investment. And in this regard, as I said earlier, Emily doesn't really need anything more than burning to dish out big numbers, but if you can lend her a little hand, she will shine much brighter. For one, if anybody on the team can hold the deep food set for her, that'll be a significant buff. Since its activation is tied to any elemental skill burst hits, you can just give it to any unit that doesn't deal too much damage on the team. Second, if you can bring a second Dendro character alongside her, that will help her, as it will alleviate her energy requirements greatly. This scenario doesn't have many realistic uses at the moment, but will become very popular once Skinage comes out, since it's a burning main DPS. Moreover, she has the best signature weapon out of the units in this list by a country mile, since other than providing immense offensive value, it also takes care of her energy requirements through a big energy refund. This makes it a more fitting addition to her kit than something like Aqua is for Yelan, for example. Overall, to me, she's the best pure sub DPS in the game, and is only really held back in the meta by the fact she doesn't provide the same utility or support characters like Yelan or Fiorina can provide. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe and also go check the standard 5-star selector guide I made a few days ago. Bye bye!